This is a video response to the GM tag question posted by Condor DM. It's taken me a little bit longer to reply to it than I intended, but let's give it a go. Some of the questions are simple to answer. Some of them require some background. This may be a lengthy video. You have been warned. What do you call player agency? Okay. I guess the intent of the question is really talking about amounts of agency, perhaps, or what things constitute agency. I'll take a step back and say that player agency is really a topic that arises from video games, where the nature of the computer program actually prohibits things that can be prepared for characters to do. This is not really ultimately an issue that we should have to face in a role-playing game. However, the style of running some games does bring into being the balance between, what the limits are between what the game master can say has happened, what the player can say has happened, and that sort of thing. Such as a game master saying, you see the scene and feel sad. Right? Now this is an intrusion from my point of view. This is the game master taking liberties which they have no right to. This is treading on my agency as the player for determining the state of my character. Okay? Whereas some people might describe agency as the player being allowed to cross a room and order a drink. Where for some people, it may be adding things to the imaginative space in which we're in, such as the type of drinks available in the bar have not been described, but the player goes up and orders a Harvey Wallbanger. Does the game master step in and say, no, you cannot, for this bar does not sell Harvey Wallbangers? You know what I mean? So what do I call player agency? This is the reasonable amount of control over what the player can influence in the game, and the same goes for the game master, who, as I've stated earlier, is also a player. So the amount to which you can contribute to or describe or alter the existing narrative is player agency. What does railroading mean to you? If you do, apply it. If not, can you say why? Railroading is a design approach for, let's say, a scenario or a session wherein choice is denied. Now, the way we get to that denial of choice is not really relevant, but this is the key purpose. The game master, the person running the game, has decided that the group will go from point A to point B and will make that happen regardless. Famous examples from gaming history. Dragonlance, often talked about as being a railroad. The original Horror on the Orient Express, amusingly enough, an adventure based on a train, is described as a railroad. And, that sort of thing, where the player gets the sense that their character is there, as I've said before, just to contribute dialogue. This is one of those signs that you're on a railroad. Things are going to happen regardless. Doesn't mean that this particular adventure won't be a hell of a lot of fun. It does mean that choice, meaningful choice in what's going to happen next, is not an aspect of play. This is not normally the way that I play, as I approach preparation and the philosophy behind running a game very differently. I believe in discovery, so I'll prepare characters, prepare outlooks for those characters, I'll prepare locations and cultures, and then what happens happens once those two things mix together. How do you handle bad players? What are some ways you would describe behavior of a bad player in your view? Assuming that experience around the table is equal or equivalent, and everybody's familiar with the game, and assuming that this question means bad players means disruptive or players that are causing problems, then that is how I would describe a bad player. Someone who causes problems for the group, either socially in the real world or with the fiction of the game world. Some ways I would describe behavior of a bad player is that the intention to disrupt. Unintentional disruptions can be dealt with through normal social means. It's that person who chooses to test you, push you, see what they can get away with, who is willing to be wildly inconsistent and use their character as a means of venting, regardless of how it affects the fun of other people at the table. The selfish person who's focused only on their own enjoyment, not contributing to the group's enjoyment, this is the bad player. What's a good player? Well, I mean, really, we're left with nothing to say but the opposite of that. A good player contributes. A good player supports. A good player shares some of the load. Arranges the place and the time that we're going to play. So if it's not a set time, verifying that everybody's going to show up, doing that part of the time, bringing stuff, getting into character, helping other people getting into character, contributes, sees the group as a group, sees the fun as a shared thing that we all build together. How do you handle splitting up a group if you do? Do it all the time. The only game I've really experienced, no, not game, but the only situation I've really experienced where splitting the party is a bad one is, a truly tactical thing, like where you have to meet the enemy as a coordinated force. There are times where you want to split the party within a scene. There's times you'll want to split them into completely different scenes, different cities even, in a lot of other games. So the dungeon crawl experience or the small unit tactics experience of some military focused games, it's, in my opinion, always the party's choice whether or not they will split. There are times when I have asked a group not to split because of the format, such as playing in email. I did it once in MechWarrior because the way that I was approaching the email game was to describe the same scene from each different perspective, which meant I was writing a ton of email. And I really needed everyone to be in the same scene to minimize the amount of work involved in the writing. So they had to agree before play to being in the same scenes together, not splitting the party. But they still got their own individualized experience. But that's a rare case. Generally in the pulp heroics style, swashbuckling style, the Star Wars games that I'm doing, we're constantly split. In fact, we rarely come together. What do you prefer more, interaction, role play? One more point on splitting the group. How do I handle it? Constant intercutting, based on the genre. If it's something like Call of Cthulhu, splitting the party works really well for building tension and fear, and knowing when to cut and switch to the other group is based on what will produce the strongest reaction. Whereas in a pulp heroics game like Hollow Earth Expedition or in All for One, cutting back and forth at a cliffhanger is okay, but just before something, you build a rhythm to it, like an action movie. There's a sequence between when you see punches being launched, and you get this feeling of, is he going to hit? Is he going to hit? Is he going to hit? And then bam, we're in a different perspective, in a different camera, or on a different character, and we're not sure what happened. That kind of thing. So, done with that. What do you prefer more? Interaction, role play, combat, puzzles, traps, or a mix? Okay, I'm in this for the interaction and the role play. Combat, puzzles, traps, I see as things which fuel role play. So I'm not really sure how we can separate these things out. But yeah, I'm really in it to see, as a player and as a game master, the interaction between the player and their character, and between each other's characters, is the meat of the enjoyment for me. And it might be combat, or it might be a mystery or a puzzle or something like that, which sparks that connection. And so that's, I guess I have to go with mix. Do you tinker with the rule set you use, or use it as written? I did a video with DVJ not long ago where I answered this question. I tend to use it as written. I tend to explore it as deeply as I can until the entire group is absolutely sure there's a problem with the rule, not with us or our understanding of it. And if we still want to play that game but absolutely cannot stand that rule, I'll change it. Otherwise, I don't. Do you mind running NPCs with a group of player characters? No, I don't mind. I prefer them to not be that active. I prefer them to be deep in a support role, rather than someone who must contribute meaningfully to whatever's going on. Like in a, as we talked about before, a military action game, I definitely don't want this NPC character that I'm running with the group to be the leader, right? It just really isn't much fun for me. It may be all right for the others, removing some of the stress of trying to decide what to do, but it completely removes any possible enjoyment I could get out of it. 10. Thoughts on campaigns and one-shots. Do you prefer one more than the other? Yeah, I'm in it for campaign play. I like character development. I like the group to develop a history together so that there can be as much IC banter as OOC banter. And one-shots I still very much enjoy, but I think I always approach one-shots with the hope that they will explode into a campaign. I certainly prepare a one-shot as if I'm preparing a campaign. How much fantasy versus realism? I think what is meant here is really, well, not really, but I think what is meant here is talking about heroics, the level of maybe fantasy reality versus realistic reality. Like the inflating hit points in games, so that the long-lived character feels more heroic. They're harder to kill, things like that. I tend to go the other way. I prefer games with a high degree of risk to them, where maybe gear adds that kind of buffer to survivability, that sort of thing. I tend to prefer games set in some version of the real world, even if there's magic or psychic powers or aliens or whatever. I still like to root things in this world with some kind of peculiar quirk to it that makes the game that game, rather than a purely fantasy world, I guess, if I understand the question. Do you prefer running modules, hacking modules, or running your own story? As I explained above, really it's neither. I guess this would fall under running my own story, but again, I go for the emergent story. So walking into it, I have just as little idea of what's going to happen as the other players. 13. What gaming system has gotten you the best results? Okay, gaming system. Most recently, that would be Ubiquity. It really, inspired me and gave me the right mix of the tools that I like with tools that I hadn't considered before, brought them together, and it's been a real pleasure to run. That said, Catalyst: A Time of War, MechWarrior 4th edition, basically really gave me good tools for synthesizing battle tech with MechWarrior, and that was great. That gave me fantastic results. Call of Cthulhu was the first game where I really felt like I was doing a good job. It wasn't that the game was okay or we had a good time. People wanted to play that game right away again, or just didn't want to stop playing. Let's just keep going. Let's keep going. That kind of thing. So, so that's BRP, Ubiquity. There are games. You have to understand the game, I guess is what I want to say. Once you understand the game, you get good results if you're willing to take the time. What method has gotten you the best results? Thinking back to your video, I think what this is talking about is genre. And so I found my voice in horror games or intrigue, mystery games. And so this is, I guess, where my natural predilections lie. And my method has been to try and learn more. That was once I started to feel like the game masters I was playing with were running the game better than I did. Then I wanted to know what they were doing, and that's how I found Call of Cthulhu, and that's why I approached it the way that I did, to really learn it inside and out before I ran it. And then when I ran it, it worked really well. And that experience pretty much set me on the path of getting new games, learning new games, exposing myself to new ideas in games and seeing how they all fit, and then seeing if I can do it. And the genre that I struggled with most was heroic pulp. I tend toward high risk games. I tend to want to set them in a world that feels like ours, and I want the consequences to be significant. And these kind of run counter to a game like Hollow Earth Expedition, where characters are larger than life, and as those campaigns go on, they can become more and more serious. Moral choices become heavier and heavier and heavier, which is in defiance of the genre. So that struggle to be able to run those games the way that's fun, the way that they're intended, that was the big one. So what methods got me the best results? Try again. And I guess to really answer the question, horror, intrigue. What got you into running these kind of games? I guess I already answered that question in question 14. And then 16, who am I tagging? I'll tag 3 people. I'll tag Fauntrodden, Sean Driscoll, and Rob Davis, the Swamper. You're it.